you know, you're in those rooms, you're in those creative rooms. You're sitting down with so many different creatives, and here you are, you're the skipper, you're the leader. You know, how do you, foster that creativity? You got an editor over here, you got an artist over here, you got a writer over here. How do you, what's a day in the life of working with a creative team with you? What's it, how do you, from start to finish, how do you foster that creativity and how do you get them from point A to Z?
So, it's funny because the first thing you have to overcome when you're in a position like mine is you walk into that room, especially if it's people who don't know you yet, and you're the vice president of global publishing for Hasbro, and immediately people say, "Oh, the suits are here," and they
Mm,
sort of this immediate perception that, all right, there's the brand owner. He's the guy who's going to tell us what we can't do. Like his job is just to put the books on everything, and he's only caring about the sales and the royalties and things like that. Um,
wait, what did you say? You said his job is to what?
to just basically to oversee the sales and the royalty checks, and it's the only thing that person cares about, right? So the first thing you have to do is make them realize that is not the reason I got into this business.
Right.
Are there people who are focused on that? Yeah, that's their job, and they do their jobs really well. My job, as I said, is to curate and to curate these brands. So, I personally have a background in publishing that goes back 30 years, and that's my training as well. So,
You even worked at a Barnes and Nobles, right?
I did, yeah. I started my publishing career unpacking boxes in the receiving room of a Barnes and Noble.
Wow, in the trenches.
I still refer to that as my first publishing job.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, and so I think the first thing you need to do is build that trust, right? You need to start immediately talking about the vision, what you're trying to achieve, the storytelling aspect of it, the fact that you want to hear their vision as well. That like one of the things that I used to say is, don't avoid doing something because you think that I will say no. Don't avoid a risk because you're afraid that I won't approve it. Take the risk. Let me reel you back in if you go too far, but you will never know if you don't show it to me in the first place, right? So, and I think that once you establish that trust, once you establish the fact that you also have credentials in the creative space, I think then the dynamic changes, and now you're having a conversation about how are we going to craft the best possible story for this project, and that's when the creativity really starts to bloom. It sometimes it doesn't happen the first day. Sometimes they leave and they're like, yeah, sure, the guy's still a suit. Now, mind you, I haven't worn a suit in 15 years, but I'm still called a suit,
It's like they're like looking right, like we see him
Yeah.
trying to disguise himself, like right.
So, yeah, but I think I've found that in almost every case, we get to the point where it is a really collaborative, really just creative environment where we're all throwing out ideas. People's ideas are valued. You get to the point where people are even able to laugh at each other and themselves and just be like, well, that was a stupid idea. And but it all grows into
Right.
something that's great. But yeah, that's for me, that has always been one of the big challenges is initially convincing people that I'm passionate about storytelling. I'm passionate about this work. And yes, I get paid for it. And yes, there are certain things that I have to make sure don't happen. Like there's not going to be nudity in a G.I. Joe comic, right? There's not going to be gratuitous violence in a Transformers comic because it's not appropriate to the brand itself, right? But there's so much space within those really broad parameters that great storytelling can happen. I mean, I think if you look back at probably one of the first examples of that. I started in Hasbro in 2006, and in 2008 we started working on the Cobra miniseries for GI Joe, which was based on Chuckles, the character Chuckles as a deep cover operative. That was probably one of the most mature and challenging GI Joe stories that had ever been written, and probably still to date has ever been written. If the creative team had held back and not sent me their original concept of it because they thought that Hasbro would just say no, the world wouldn't have that comic, right? So, it's important. It's really important to build that trust and to build those credentials as soon as you can.
I love what you said about coming from corporate, but I also have creative credentials. I love that. That's like a creative team's dream, right? That's like a creative team's dream. They're like, okay, yes, he's from corporate, but he also has creative credentials. That is awesome. So he's gonna speak my language, you know? But I want to go back to a word that you said earlier, where you said protect. So you're also very protective of your creative team. Like, okay, this is what the creative team wants. I'm gonna go to fight for them. I'm gonna go back to corporate and go fight for them.
Mhm.
So I feel like yes, you're coming from corporate, but also more like you're an advocate for two pillars um of the brand, which is the creative team and what the audience wants.
Mhm.
you know and it's like, no, this is important, or this is what the audience wants, and I got to give it to them, dude. And this is what the creative team is really passionate about and really believes in. Do you find yourself a lot like, always fighting the good fight for the creative team and the audience? And how do you navigate that, professionally?
I will say that in the early years of my career, it was far more difficult, right? And again, it comes down to trust. It comes down to a track record where you can show. So the first time that I walked in and I said, this character is going to do this, and and that's how the story is going to go. Going back to the Cobra miniseries, we had Chuckles, who's the hero, right? I mean, he's GI Joe. He has to either blow his cover or execute his handler, right? I mean, those are his two choices. And spoilers,
Nice.
spoilers, but he executes
Right.
his handler, right?
Mm.
And when I first pitched that internally, people were like, you can't do that. Like GI Joe, they're good guys. They don't do that kind of stuff. This is not the right thing. And I, it was a tough conversation. And I mean, I remember literally, at that time, I was a senior manager, right? I mean, that's really low in the, organizational structure of things. I had a boss, he had a boss, she had a boss. And, and I was sitting in a room, 18 months in at Hasbro, and I'm sitting in there with their head of corporate communications, the chief marketing officer, and I'm trying to explain them why one of their main characters is going to kill an innocent person.
Wow.
But I think that was really a turning point for me and for Hasbro's vision of the comics as well as a corporation, because the argument that I was able to make was, this is so integral to the character. This is so important to this particular story and how it's going to develop. And audiences are going to understand how authentic this is by this one moment. And if we don't do this, we're going to lose the audience. And, to their credit, they said, okay, go ahead, you can do it. The caveat was we had to put a parental advisory on the comic, which was kind of exciting.
Wow, that's kind of cool. Yeah.
But we did it, and sure enough, it became that. If you ask any GI Joe comic book fan, I think most of them will say that is the single greatest miniseries in the history of Hasbro of Hasbro Comics.
Wow.
So
Congratulations on that.
when you do that, you start to build that trust again. You build that reputation of, this isn't a person who does something just for shock value. It's not somebody who's just going to do it because it's the easy way out of the story. This is someone who's always thinking about what's best for the characters, what's best for the story, what's best for the readers and the fans, and and is going to deliver on that. And over time, those conversations get easier and easier because you become, oh, Michael Kelly wants to do this with My Little Pony. We're going to let him do that because he's got a track record of giving storytelling the experience that people want to have.
Wow, that's brilliant. That's amazing. That's amazing. You really earned your stripes there.
Yeah, it's hard work. I mean, it's nobody walks into a job like that. I think, if I'm wrong about that, I'd love to meet the person, but nobody walks into a job like that and is successful from day one. You have to build relationships all across the organization. You can't be intimidated by power. You can't be, but at the same time, you need to be respectful. You need, again, coming back to the ideas of empathy, compassion, understand that chief marketing officer has to answer to shareholders, that he's got a whole other set of parameters that he's judged on. And
right.
if you make him worried, if you give him information that's like that could damage the brand, then you have to understand they're not going to go along with it, right? So you have to understand, again, their motivation, what's fueling their concerns, and try and speak to it from that direction.